Okie dokie, class. Today we're going to be talking about human impacts on aquatic ecosystems. We should be on page 4 in your packets. One of the things I wanted to remind you of was this range of tolerance graph that we looked at in the past. Remember that all species have an optimum range needed to maintain homeostasis. Right, and there's different, lots of different environmental conditions out there. But if these environmental conditions become either too high or too low, we know that that can stress out different species. And so as we get to that, lower or higher level, whatever it might be, species, become stressed out, and they might experience lowered growth, a reduction in reproduction, and or death, right? If it becomes too high or too low. And so that's one of the things I want you to keep in mind as we look at coral reefs. And because there are some human impacts or some human activities that we are doing that are stressing coral reefs out and other aquatic species as well. So we're going to look at coral reefs first, though. Coral reefs first. Before we look at some of the things we're doing as humans that are stressing them out, let's point out some of the things, some of the reasons why coral reefs are important. Think of coral reefs as the rainforest of the ocean. They are home to tons and tons and tons of different biodiversity. They provide us with a lot of different food, tourism, protection, and also medicines, right? We got a little, not a fun fact, but I want to call it a bad or a sad fact down here. Scientists have estimated that 75% of the world's corals are at risk, and at least 10% have already died. So we're going to look at some of the things that have led to this 10% and the 75%, why they're at risk and why so many have already died. Okay. Here again are some of the reasons why coral reefs are important. All right, so let's look at threats to coral reefs. Some of the more obvious threats are just like the physical threats, and that's usually from boats, their anchors and their chains, just dropping their anchors and chains on top of the reefs themselves, and also snorkelers, as tourism explodes in these different areas, which can be good because that helps fund different different industries other than fishing. And we saw the documentary Racing to Extinction, how bringing ecotourism to different places helps bring in money so that they're not, for example, hunting manta rays and things like that, right? But it can lead to other issues like snorkelers damaging the reefs with their fins or touching them with their hands and breaking pieces off to bring home as souvenirs, things like that, right? Here was an article about a luxury yacht damaging a reef in Belize, and this is unfortunately really common. Some other issues with physical threats are blast fishing. That's just the use of dynamite to stun fish. And once they're stunned, they float to the top and they can be collected by the fishermen. Same thing with cyanide poisoning. And then here is just a nice infographic showing us all the different threats to coral reefs and all the different fishing styles and how they're just being attacked from all different angles. And all species are kind of at risk. Turtles, different marine life, marine mammals, the invertebrates, all the shrimp and crabs, and all of them are kind of being attacked from all different angles here. All the different styles of fishing or harvesting from the ocean here. Some chemical impacts, sedimentation. Sedimentation is just the increase in sediments from above falling and building up on these different reefs, and that usually occurs because of the increased erosion that's happening on land. Oil spills, of course, are terrible for the marine life and birds and all the mammals who occupy that space. Here was another article in the news about a pipeline that damaged some reefs. This was in February 2nd of 2020. Here was another recent article of oil spill in Brazil, February 10th of 2020. Plastic waste and microplastics, we know that that is a major issue in our oceans, just the amount of plastic and the microplastics that we're finding in our different marine life and just floating around in our oceans. There's an interesting article here that we read earlier in the unit about nurdles and how these nurdles they're just pretty much microplastics and how they can be mistaken for food for many different animals in our oceans. We find them in a lot of different forms. One is we've all seen these face washes that have exfoliating claims, and one of the things that they're using are these little microbeads, and that is an example of a nurdle, right? Another chemical threat to coral reefs is coral bleaching. And I have a short Edpuzzle that I'd like you to watch that walks you through what coral bleaching is. So there's another separate video that we'll look at to talk more about coral bleaching. And some other chemical toxins that are threatening reefs and other marine life. Sunscreens, pesticides, and metals, right? We know that pesticides, a lot of the pesticides that we use on land eventually run off and make their way into our oceans. Sunscreens, even if you're not in a coral reef area, you should use coral reef sensitive sunscreen. It doesn't have the chemicals because eventually those chemicals in sunscreen make their way into our water supply and eventually will damage coral reefs over a longer period of time. So just in general, we should all use a reef-safe or ocean-friendly sunscreen. And they will have this stamp on them if they are ocean-friendly. So when you're buying sunscreen, buy sunscreen that is ocean-friendly. Not only is it ocean-friendly, but it's also human-friendly, right? So it's healthier to use ocean-friendly sunscreen compared to other sunscreens that have other chemicals in them. So read the label. All right, so some other threats to coral reefs. Invasive species like lionfish and the crown of thorns starfish. Here was an interesting article that I found how they're using underwater robots to seek and kill invasive starfish. It's pretty awesome. Some other biological threats are just different diseases and pathogens that affect reefs, and these are becoming more common as the climate continues to change. All right, so some natural threats that have been magnified through human activity. So storms, right? Storms, temperature changes, salinity changes, predation, and algae overgrowth. These are all things that can threaten reefs and aquatic environments naturally, but there's a lot of things that we're doing that are magnifying these threats, right? And we worked on that coral reef gizmo where we looked at temperature, salinity, and storm impacts. And so we know that these all affect reefs and other marine life. Here, just pointing out some of the things. So storm impacts, obviously climate change. As climate change, what are the driving forces with climate change? We know that burning fossil fuels releases more greenhouse gases, which fuels climate change, right? So climate change would apply to all three of these storm impacts temperature changes, salinity changes, predation. Humans and our different ships and just human activity, we unfortunately introduce a lot of invasive species in areas that they should not be. And that's the definition of an invasive species, right? It's just a species that either gets introduced through different human activities, through maybe it's just releasing pets or the ballast in a boat, introducing new species into environments that they wouldn't naturally be. And then algae overgrowth, so just algae blooms. So we talked about algae blooms and eutrophication due to the excess nutrients in the water. So here we already worked on this coral reef gizmo. Okay, going to skip ahead to oil spills. So earlier in the week, you guys watched some videos and read an article about different oil spills, and we know how impactful and those can be on different marine life, mammals, birds, and all the different aquatic life. Obviously, the, the the animals become smothered in the oil. Their feathers or their fur becomes smothered and coated with oil. The fish die from the ingestion of the oil. Their gills become blocked. Invertebrates like crabs and shrimp and starfish become smothered and immobilized and eventually die. Here is one case study. This was a famous oil spill in 1989. This was the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska, where almost 11 million gallons of oil were released. Here is a picture of that super tanker that released 11 million gallons of oil in Alaska. Another interesting thing in the news related to oil and oil spills is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and they're looking to open this up to drilling. And unfortunately, when they do this, it's inevitable that something is going to spill, right? If is not the question, it's when and how much. So we all remember the Deepwater Horizon BP explosion in the Gulf of Mexico that released 780 million gallons over the course of 87 days. Here are just some statistics here. And we watch those videos and we know that, the people, the marine life, and all of the industries in those areas are still feeling some of the effects from this Deepwater Horizon the Deepwater Horizon explosion that occurred on that BP oil rig in 2010. They're still feeling the effects of that today, 10 plus years later. So I'm going to stop right now and pause and pick up on a separate video.